My daughter disappeared for 15 years. And years later, she tried to have me arrested for raising them. But she didn't want to make up for lost time with her children. She wanted. For 15 years, my home was sustained by silence, longing, and the courage to raise 3 boys I didn't ask for, but welcomed with my whole heart. My daughter, their mother, simply vanished, and I had to be a mother twice over with no time for questions. When she finally reappeared, I thought it would be to rekindle our bond. But it wasn't love that brought her back. It was something much colder and calculated. This is a story about abandonment, daily choices, and the kind of motherhood proven not by blood, but by presence. A story of judgments inside and outside the courtroom, and of a woman who, though wounded, chose to continue loving. I'm so glad you're here. Follow my story to the end. And tell me where you're reading from so I can see how far our love has reached. She walked into the room like a ghost who never left, yet whose absence shaped my entire life. Rachel wore an elegant dress, as if she were going to an awards ceremony, not to try to erase my existence with an accusation. The judge called for silence as her lawyer coldly described the facts. Kidnapping of minors. I almost laughed, not out of irony but out of despair. What kind of mother abandons her children for 15 years and returns calling it theft? I sat there, listening to every word as if they were stones thrown against my history. Those boys she claimed had been kidnapped, they were my boys. I fed them, took them to school, rocked them on feverish nights. Now she returned demanding a maternal role she never wanted to play. The room seemed to shrink with each argument that inverted what I knew to be true. When I looked at Rachel, I saw no regret, no shame, just calculation. She observed everything as if she already knew the outcome. The lawyer spoke of her supposed rights, of the stolen years, of lost opportunities. But the only thing she lost was the time to love. No one could give that back. My chest burned with anguish, not for myself, but for those 3 hearts she never wanted to care for. I was called to speak. I stood slowly because my legs trembled more than I let on. I looked at the judge, then at Rachel, and finally at the benches where the boys sat. They deserved to know their love was true, even if the world doubted it. I took a deep breath and began to speak. She came to destroy me with the same ease with which she forgot me. My voice came out calmer than I expected, perhaps because inside me, everything had already hurt too much. I recounted the day I found the house empty, no note, no explanation. I said I waited, I searched, I cried alone in their room like a mother who loses a daughter while she's still alive. Then I found myself facing 3 children with hunger, fear, and eyes that asked, "What now?" I spoke of every sacrifice without playing the victim, because I never did it out of obligation, but out of love. I was never perfect, but I was there for every first step, every report card, every doctor's visit. While Rachel traveled the world, I traveled the hallways of schools and hospitals, hand in hand with my grandsons. This isn't in any document, but it's etched in their souls. And deep down, I think in mine too. I didn't attack her because I didn't need to. Her absences spoke louder than any words I could say. I simply reported the facts with serenity and truth. It was all I had, and it was always enough for the boys. The silence in the courtroom wasn't of judgment. It was of astonishment, perhaps shame for her. I returned to my seat with my heart pounding, but my head held high. Facing my daughter wasn't a choice, it was a consequence. And even now, in the face of the pain, I still asked, why did she do this? Why after so much time, so much silence? Why now? After 15 years of silence? I opened my purse with careful hands, like one handling a sacred relic. From within, I pulled out the envelope I had kept all these years, like one carrying an altar of memories. Photos of their first days of school, crayon drawings, proudly signed report cards. Each paper was proof that I had been there, even when no one else was. I handed the judge the set of documents that told a story Rachel tried to erase. They weren't just files. They were pieces of their childhood stitched with love. Vaccination cards, school declarations, medical prescriptions with my signature, all testifying that those children did have a mother, only they called her grandmother. The judge's eyes scanned each page attentively. I watched her in silence, like one waiting for time to deliver justice. Rachel, on the other hand, kept her gaze fixed on an invisible point, as if she wanted to evaporate from there. But it was too late. The truth had weight, smell, form, and it was printed on those papers that no one could dispute. Handing over that envelope was like opening my chest before everyone. No lie was possible in the face of that. It was my love materialized in records. And there, in that room, perhaps for the first time, the world could understand who truly raised those boys. Now the court will see who really was a mother here. Daniel stood up with a serious face and tearful eyes. Even young, he had a presence that filled the space, as if speaking for all of us. When he started, his voice trembled, but he didn't hesitate. He recounted how his grandmother taught him to tie his shoelaces, to respect others, to dream of a better future. It wasn't a defense, it was a confession of love. He said he didn't know what it was like to have a mother until he realized he already had one. That Evelyn not only provided shelter, but also direction. She gave me food, but she also gave me courage. She took me to school, but she also taught me how to walk in life. The room fell silent. No one dared interrupt the boy who spoke with his heart in his hands. Daniel wasn't there to attack Rachel. He was there to honor the one who stayed. He spoke of nights of fever, of improvised birthdays with simple cakes and tight hugs. He said Evelyn never promised the world but gave everything she could, and that was more than enough. His speech wasn't rehearsed, it was heartfelt. Every word was a foundation of that family. In the end, he looked at me with shining eyes and said, "Being a mother isn't about whose name is on the birth certificate. It's about who stays when the world falls apart. She never left us. That is being a mother." After the testimony there was silence. A silence that said, "What now?" The judge, with firmness and empathy, suggested a period of cohabitation with the biological mother. It was their right after all. I froze. But before I could say anything, Daniel looked at his brothers and then spoke. He said they didn't know Rachel, and perhaps it was time to try. Marcus nodded in silence. David crossed his arms, distrustful but agreed. I knew that look. It wasn't hope, it was a search for answers. They didn't want a new mother. They wanted to understand why they were left. And perhaps to discover if there was still anything to save from that broken relationship before it even began. Rachel reacted with a smile that tried to appear natural, but it sounded rehearsed to me. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she showed no emotion. She just accepted it like someone closing a deal. But I let them decide. Because raising them with love also meant letting them be free to think, feel, make mistakes. Even if it cost me sleepless nights. I saw my boys take a step toward the woman who forgot them. And even with a heavy heart I allowed it. We don't know our mother, but we'd like to try. Alone that night, I sat in the living room armchair with an untouched cup of tea in my hands. My body was there, but my soul wandered between memories and worries. I trusted the boys, but not Rachel. She was unpredictable, an elegant and dangerous shadow from the past. And now she would enter their lives like someone knocking on the door after years of silence. The fear wasn't of losing them, it was of seeing them hurt again. I could bear the pain, but I couldn't bear to see each of them broken by disappointment. What if she deceived, if she lied, if she destroyed everything we built? I couldn't protect them from what they wanted to know. I could only be here, ready to welcome again. I took a deep breath and looked around. The house was small, but it carried every step of the history we lived. It was our sanctuary, our home. Rachel could try to enter now, but she would never understand everything it took to build that love. Being a mother was something she never understood, and perhaps never would. I closed my eyes and silently asked for strength, because sometimes loving is also knowing when to let go. Not every wound heals with time alone. As I organized a forgotten desk drawer, I found a yellowed envelope, hidden among old papers belonging to my son-in-law. I recognized his handwriting immediately, firm but hurried as it always was. The letter spoke of a substantial life insurance policy, left in the children's names with specific clauses. It was a legitimate document, dated before Rachel's disappearance. My heart sank as I realized that this piece of paper could explain everything. I remembered the vague conversations between Rachel and her husband, her absences, the whispered phone calls. At the time, I thought they were typical marital squabbles. Now it all made sense. She knew about the insurance and perhaps always had. Suddenly, her return no longer seemed like a whim or remorse. It was calculation, pure and cold. I sat on the bed with the letter between my fingers, trying to contain the revolt that rose like an old fire. 15 years of silence, and now she reappeared with lawyers, disguises, and a lawsuit? All for money. Behind that appearance of a repentant mother was a sordid, cruel, and well-articulated plan. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a farce orchestrated in advance. I closed my eyes and sighed. Fate had given me the puzzle pieces. And the image that emerged was not pretty. She knew, and waited for the right time. I called an old lawyer friend and asked for help understanding the insurance details. When she finished explaining, my suspicions were confirmed. Rachel would only have access to the value if she legally proved that she had custody of the children for most of their lives. That hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about love. It was about legal and financial necessity. My chest filled with indignation. How could someone use their own children as a safe key? Every gesture of hers in recent days took on new meaning. The smiles, the rehearsed hugs, the attempt to rebuild a relationship. All part of a theater. And I, despite everything, still had doubts, still tried to believe in some remorse. There was no more room for illusions. Rachel needed to prove something she never had. Presence, care, devotion. But to do that, she needed the boys. She needed to manipulate, deceive, emotionally seduce 3 hearts marked by absence. It was a race against time, and against the true affection she never knew how to cultivate. I closed the envelope tightly like one closing a door. The truth was before me, stark and raw. She wants money. She never wanted the children. I gathered the 3 in the living room late that afternoon, when the house was quieter and the sun was setting slowly. I sat before them with the envelope in my hands, like one carrying a delicate bomb. Daniel was the first to notice my expression. Marcus held my hand. David, in silence, stared at me as if he already knew. They were ready, and they deserved to know. I told them everything calmly, without anger. I showed them their father's letter, explained the insurance clauses, and how Rachel depended on a lie to claim something that didn't belong to her. I didn't try to influence them, I just gave them the truth. They had the right to decide what to do with it. But the pain in their eyes was hard to face. Daniel took a deep breath and mumbled something that stuck with me. So it was never about us. Marcus cried in silence. David got up and left without saying a word. I wanted to hug them, but I knew that at that moment they needed to process it alone. It was the end of an illusion and the beginning of a wound that might never fully heal. I closed my eyes and for the first time wondered if I was doing the right thing. But the truth needed to be told. Choose with open eyes, not with a broken heart. I called Rachel and asked to meet at a discreet cafe in the city. I chose the place carefully, small, quiet, intimate enough for a reckoning without an audience. She arrived punctually, as she always did when she wanted to appear composed. She sat across from me with the polished smile of someone pretending not to be afraid. But I knew that look well. It was defensive, not confident. There was an armed silence between us, like a minefield of unsaid words. I ordered black coffee, she chamomile tea. We pretended normalcy for a few minutes until the curtain fell. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I know why you came back." She didn't answer, just lowered her eyes for a second. Enough to confirm everything I already knew. I told her about the letter, the insurance, the custody clauses. She tried to hide her tension, but her fingers drumming on the cup betrayed her. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to cry. I just stated the facts one by one with the coldness that truth demands. Rachel, for the first time, seemed small before me. We left the cafe without touching, without saying goodbye. But something had changed forever. She came as a victim, but left as a villain. That same night, I sat in front of the computer and opened the dossier that had come from discreet sources. Documents proving Rachel's bankruptcy, accumulated debts, and shell companies. It was all there in black and white. I printed copies, organized them chronologically, and attached bank statements. Rachel wasn't just bankrupt, she was desperate. I sent the material to the case lawyer with an anonymous letter, but I needed to face Rachel one last time before everything came to light. I arranged another meeting and brought the envelope with me. She arrived more suspicious this time, and when I slid the papers across the table, her expression changed. For the first time I saw fear. Not because of what I knew, but because it could ruin her plan. She tried to deny it, implying it was all a setup. But the stamps, signatures, and statements spoke louder. She said she was betrayed by partners, that she knew nothing. But the dates matched her reappearance. She was sinking, and her children were her lifeboat. A desperate mother doesn't act like this. A desperate woman, yes. I stood up and said the last sentence with the firmness I had left. You built ruins and want to live in what I built. At the third meeting, she no longer had the same sparkle in her eyes. She seemed tired, worn out, cornered. When she realized there was no escape, that the boys knew that the documents exposed her, Rachel did what she always knew how to do. She shifted the blame. She said it was all Max's idea. That he manipulated her, threatened her, forced her to act. Her words came out broken by forced crying. Too rehearsed to move me. She spoke of fear, debts, the promises Max made. She tried to redeem herself, but she didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. But it was too late. I was no longer the mother who believed every tear. Now I was the woman who saw everything, understood everything, and was no longer deceived. She wanted to reverse the roles once again. She wanted me to see her as a victim, not as an accomplice. But I knew that narrative. She always had a talent for stories. Only this time the facts spoke louder. The boys knew. Justice would soon know. And I finally saw her for who she truly was. I left that cafe with peace in my soul. Because it wasn't her who scared me anymore. I know who you are. And now they do too. The paperwork was sent carefully, without a return address, but with irrefutable proof. Copies of bank documents, frauds, money laundering schemes. It was all there, packaged and delivered directly to Judge Liam's chambers. I knew the same day, when he called an extraordinary meeting with the lawyers. His expression was more severe, more skeptical. The tide was turning. I felt a mix of fear and relief. I had done the right thing, but it also brought consequences. I exposed not only Rachel, but Max, the man no one had known was part of this story until then. The judge, meticulous, did not react with scandal, but with attentive silence. The gears of justice began to turn discreetly but relentlessly. The documents showed suspicious financial movements in the name of shell companies linked to Max Allen. International transfers, joint accounts, falsifications. It was a puzzle whose pieces fit together terrifyingly. And at the center of it all, Rachel, with signatures, authorizations, direct involvement. It made it clear. Her return was never about children. It was about money. The judge looked up, fixed his gaze on Rachel's legal representatives and said firmly, "This changes everything." He wasn't just a hidden husband. He was a criminal. 2 days later, I received a call from the judge's assistant. Rachel did not appear at the new hearing. Max had also disappeared. My heart raced because deep down I knew it was only a matter of time. The escape was no surprise. It was the obvious outcome for someone who always chose the shortcut, never the right path. But this time justice was faster than her. The police located them on a highway, trying to cross the state with fake documents and cash. They were in a rental car, ready to vanish from the map. When I saw the news on television, my stomach churned. Rachel again leaving everything behind. Only this time it wouldn't be children crying for her. It would be the law waiting on the other side. The images showed her handcuffed, head down, trying to hide her face with her hands. Max stood beside her, impassive, like someone who already expected that end. It was the cruelest portrait of a lie. Two adults who chose crime instead of truth, profit instead of love. My chest ached, but not from anger. It was grief for someone who never wanted to be a mother. The boys watched in silence, like someone watching an inevitable ending. You fled your children again. This time you were handcuffed. The next day the headlines were clear. Rachel Lewis and Max Allen arrested for fraud and attempted embezzlement. The judge confirmed all accusations. Falsified documents, illegal banking schemes, and using her children as a means to access undue funds. The custody process was immediately suspended. There was no longer any doubt about her intentions. It was the end of a lie too long. In court, I heard the sentence like someone closing a cycle. Rachel and Max would be criminally prosecuted, and the case would be taken to federal court for involvement in illegal financial operations. The mask had fallen, and the world now saw what the boys and I already knew. Not even the best lawyer could rebuild the destroyed image she herself cultivated. But however, just the victory had a bitter taste. There was no celebration, only the silence of those who survived. The boys were quiet, each dealing with the pain in their own way. I just hugged them. We said nothing. Because sometimes what is lost is greater than any reparation. And what is gained is just the right to move forward. In the end, custody would be settled. But feelings, they had already chosen a side a long time ago. Custody will be decided. But love already has. The social worker from the NGO that had followed the case called me days after the sentencing. She said there was a house available for long-term foster families, a larger space, with a garden and enough rooms for the boys to have privacy. I visited the place with them, and I saw in each of their eyes the sparkle I had so desired. It was simple but full of possibilities. A new beginning finally possible. We signed the papers with the help of the organization. They called me lifelong guardian, and I felt the weight of that expression, not as a burden but as an honor. The previous house held too many memories. This one would hold the future. We began to pack things, and I realized how life can change when truth finds space. The past would be kept in boxes, and love would remain free. Marcus was already choosing where to hang his drawings. David measured the corners to organize his books. Daniel looked at me with that restrained smile, as if to say, we did it. It was all I needed, to see my boys building belonging roots home. And this time without fear. I, who thought I would end my days in silence, now heard voices and plans throughout the house. That night, lying in my new bed, I murmured a phrase to myself. Perhaps I lost a daughter, but I gained 3 men. Soon after the move, Daniel received a letter from the state university. He opened it with trembling hands and shining eyes. He had secured a full scholarship for the law course, with assistance from the local community, and a letter of recommendation written by the NGO. I cried in silence as he read the document. It wasn't just his victory, it was ours. A fruit that took us years to ripen. He hugged me and said he wanted to study to protect people like us. That he wanted to make a difference like Judge Liam did. I felt pride but also a painful nostalgia. That boy, whom I saw learn to walk, now walked on his own toward a future he dreamed of with courage. The house was celebrating, but my heart was in prayer. May nothing stop him from flying. Daniel began organizing his materials, planning his routine, visiting the university. Every step he took was like a new chapter in our story. His brothers celebrated with him, and I tried to hold back tears. It was like seeing love earn a diploma, care turn into a path, pain turn into triumph. He looked at me and said, "All of this is because of you, Grandma. The future you gave us we will honor." The letter arrived with the state penitentiary's seal. I recognized Rachel's handwriting as soon as I saw the envelope. I waited until the boys left to read it. It was brief, without fanfare, but loaded with something between guilt and weariness. She said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt anyone, that she now understood what she had lost. She asked for forgiveness, not for herself but for her children. She said she dreamed of a new chance. I held the paper for long minutes before folding it. I didn't cry. I had already cried too much for her. There, between those lines, there was no reconstruction. There was regret but not love. And perhaps deep down not even true regret, just an attempt to ease her conscience. I grieved for her, but not for myself. I was already at peace. I thought about showing it to the boys, but I didn't. They didn't need any more confusion. They had the right to build a clean future, without the weight of maternal guilt. May Rachel find her way if there was still time. As for us, we moved on, hand in hand with hearts rebuilt. I placed the letter in the fireplace. I watched the paper turn to ashes without saying a word. The answer was silence. It was during Sunday lunch, with the table full of rice, beans, and laughter, that Marcus brought up the idea. He said, with the simplicity of someone talking about the weather, that he wanted to be officially called Marcus Brown. Daniel and David stared at him in silence and then nodded. None of them hesitated. It wasn't a break from the past. It was an affirmation of the present. I was surprised, emotional, not knowing what to say. But they had already decided. They said the surname Lewis said nothing about who they were. That Brown represented care, courage, and permanence. It was the name of the one who stayed, of the one who loved without promises, of the one who raised them with firmness and affection. My heart beat faster. We took the request to the NGO's lawyer, who expedited the process with legal support. It would be a formal change but also symbolic. I never asked for this. I never dreamed of replacing her. Only of protecting what she left behind. But at that moment I understood that it wasn't about me. It was about them. and what they chose to carry with them. Marcus hugged me tight and said, "We are brown. Always have been. Not out of shame for the past, but out of pride for the present." The hearing was quick, almost perfunctory, but for us it carried the weight of a lifetime. Judge Liam looked at the three with a slight smile, as if he already expected that outcome. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Daniel answered first. "It means that now we are on paper what we already are in our hearts." My hands were sweating. My eyes teary, couldn't stop looking at the boys. The judge approved the change with a stamp and a nod of his head. Done. They were officially brown. Not by imposition, not by rejection, but by love. I felt my body tremble. Those children I rocked, I defended, I loved now carried my name as a banner. It was more than a gesture. It was a silent shout to the world. Leaving the courthouse, we took a picture together. I was in the center, with the three of them on each side, smiling as we had never smiled before. The image was etched in my mind like an invisible trophy. No money in the world could buy that. No report, no sentence could dispute it. They chose to be mine, and I was always theirs. David whispered in my ear. "Now no one else has doubts. Now the world knows who our mother is." That night, I sat in the garden of the new house with a blanket over my shoulders and a warm heart. There were no applause, no trophies. But inside me the feeling was one of victory. Not the victory of someone who won a legal battle, but of someone who planted love and harvested men. They were inside, making popcorn and laughing at some silly thing. That was it. That was the prize. I thought of Rachel. Not with resentment, but with compassion. She lost so much without realizing it. And I, wanting nothing more than to protect them, gained what matters most. Life gave me a second chance to be a mother. And I embraced it. I no longer blame myself. I no longer wonder what could have been different. I accepted everything that was. Gradually, I understood that pain doesn't disappear but transforms. That love, when true, survives any absence. They call me mom without embarrassment. They defend me with pride. And they carry the name Brown as an inheritance of feeling, not of blood. No one can take that from me. Or from the world. Smiling to myself, I murmured. I won without wanting to win. I just wanted to love. She didn't lose a daughter. She gained 3 sons. I received the invitation by email, from the coordinator of the NGO that had been with us from the beginning. She said that my story could help other people, that my voice carried more than pain. It carried experience, overcoming, and courage. I didn't know whether to accept. Me a speaker? I never imagined filling that role. But perhaps time was asking me for exactly that, to turn a scar into a bridge. I went to the community center, sat before 20 women in plastic chairs, and began to tell my story. I didn't read a script. I just spoke. About the abandonment, the fear, the love that made me continue. I saw discreet tears, attentive gazes. At the end, an elderly woman hugged me and said, "You saved more than your grandchildren. You saved us too." The following week, I was asked to repeat the lecture at a public school. Then at a shelter. Each time I spoke, I felt the pain was less heavy. As if my voice echoed within myself, healing old wounds. I realized that giving meaning to pain doesn't erase it, but illuminates it. And that is enough. On the way home, I wrote a simple phrase in my notebook that I never forgot. My pain became a voice. My love an example. David was always the quietest, the most observant. But that afternoon, he came home with a sparkle in his eyes and a folder in his hands. He had written an article for a high school essay contest on the theme "Who Taught Me to Love." He didn't tell me the title right away. He waited until I was sitting, handed me the pages, and simply said, "Read slowly." The title disarmed me. My grandmother was my mother. The text was a mixture of memories, reflections, and gratitude. He spoke of how he watched me prepare coffee before school, how he heard my breathing when I fell asleep at the foot of his bed on feverish nights. He spoke of what it means to be a mother without obligation, only choice, and how that is worth more than any certificate. I cried when I finished. Not from sadness but from recognition. It was as if he had translated everything I had lived, and perhaps what I had never been able to say. Knowing that he saw this, even without me ever asking for recognition, was a gift. More than any tribute, that text was a mirror of what we planted together. I kept the article in my most intimate drawer. alongside old letters and photos from the early days. Being a mother is a choice she made every day. It was a cloudy morning when we decided to go to the cemetery together. The boys, now men, walked silently by my side. We carried simple flowers and an arrangement Marcus had made with photos and words. When we arrived, I stayed a few steps behind, letting them approach first. There was his name engraved on the headstone. Still hurt even after so many years. Daniel knelt and murmured something. David stood, his eyes fixed on the stone. Marcus took a paper from his pocket and read softly. "Your love left us, but she stayed. And that's why we are here." It wasn't a goodbye. It was a declaration of life. He too had been a victim of abandonment. But, in a way, his wish was fulfilled. His children were well. I stayed until last. I touched the cold stone with my fingertips and closed my eyes. I remembered the day I received the news of his death, and how everything had changed since then. I thought of Rachel, of everything that could have been. But there, in that moment, there was only peace. No anger, no lament. Just gratitude for having had the chance to care for what he left behind. We left hand in hand. Not like someone ending something, but like someone starting anew. Now he can rest. They are home. Daniel returned home with a different sparkle in his eyes. He recounted that he had started a tutoring project at an NGO near the college. He taught Portuguese and history to vulnerable children. He said he wanted to give back everything he had received. He wanted to be a bridge, not a wall. The seed of care I planted in him was beginning to blossom in other soils. I visited him one day by surprise. I found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by attentive children, explaining a fable as if it were an epic. Every gesture of his carried empathy. Every word was a brick of hope in the lives of those little ones. I hid behind the door and cried silently. That scene was greater than any diploma. That night he told me stories of each child. Of the eyes that recognized abandonment. Of the hands that trembled with fear and trust at the same time. He knew exactly what to do because he had been in that place on the other side of pain. And now he built bridges with the same strength with which he was welcomed. I hugged him tightly as on his first day of school and whispered, "You are a true master." He sows what he received, care. Marcus was always the most sensitive. Since he was little, he would draw broken hearts and then tape the pieces back together. When he told me he had enrolled in nursing school, I wasn't surprised. It was as if he was answering an old calling. He said he wanted to care, but not just for physical wounds, he wanted to be with those no one sees. He started the course with enthusiasm. In his first month, he volunteered to accompany experienced nurses on home visits. He would come home telling stories of forgotten elderly people, sick children, and lonely mothers. Each story touched him deeply. But instead of recoiling, he gave more of himself. He carried a silent strength that came from the love he received. One day, he handed me an old drawing restored by himself. It was our portrait. Me in an apron surrounded by the three of them. "That's what inspired me," he said. I hugged him, my heart tight with pride. Marcus always saw beyond. Always felt beyond. And now, he found a way to transform that into a profession, into a mission. "I want others to feel what my grandmother gave me," he said, smiling. "I want others to feel what my grandmother gave me." The news arrived via email from the school. David had won the state essay contest. The theme was "What is a family?" And he wrote with soul, as he always does. He called me into the living room, sat me on the couch, and began to read. His words were simple but devastating. He spoke of absence, of reconstruction, of love learned through coexistence and not biology. He cited episodes from our daily life. Coffee with cookies, nights of old movies, silences understood without words. He described what it means to be welcomed, not just sheltered. "Family is who stays," he wrote. And after finishing the reading, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. I hugged him tightly, feeling that text was a mirror of our journey. He was invited to read the text on a local radio station. His voice, once timid, now carried conviction. He said he wanted to write to show that no one is condemned to absence, that love can be born from abandonment, if someone has the courage to stay. And I stayed. With all the fears, with all the risks. But I stayed. And in that final sentence he defined everything we built. The answer was simple. Family is who stays. I received the invitation with surprise, in a simple envelope delivered by a smiling neighbor. The city hall would honor me on Mother's Day, with the title of Mother of the Year. I didn't know what to think. Not out of false modesty, but because I never did anything expecting recognition. I just loved. I loved because it was what I knew how to do. Because it was what they needed. On the day of the ceremony, the benches in the small auditorium were full. I saw familiar faces, teachers, social workers, mothers, children. And in the front row, there they were. Daniel, Marcus, and David sitting like men who carried a story of courage in their hearts. When I was called to the stage, my legs trembled. But my heart was calm. I was not alone. They applauded before I even said a word. I took the microphone, took a deep breath, and spoke with what was left of my voice. Being a mother is not giving up. Even when you have every reason to leave. Even when the world says you can't. You stay. And you teach by example. I just stayed. Some cried. Others just smiled in silence. And I felt whole. The plaque I received had my name engraved in golden letters. Evelyn Brown, Mother of the Year. I never thought a simple name could be so powerful. The morning after the tribute, I woke up to noises in the living room. I thought it was the television, but I found the three of them on the floor, cutting out photos and gluing colorful papers onto an improvised mural. They said they wanted to make something of ours. A gift that would stay on the wall forever. It was a mural of memories, but also of silent love. Each piece had something unique. An old note in my handwriting, a scribbled recipe, a yellowed photograph. Marcus drew a tree with our hands as roots. David wrote phrases he heard me say in the most difficult moments that he heard me say during the most difficult moments. And Daniel glued a sheet with the word resistance written in large letters. That was more than a tribute. It was home-stamped in color and feeling. We spent hours together assembling that panel. We laughed remembering the stories behind each image. We cried in silence when a memory hurt deeper. And in the end, when everything was glued and illuminated by the afternoon sun, I understood that this mural was more than memory. It was a legacy. It was the testimony that love remains. Marcus looked at me and said, "Your voice will continue here. Even when you're not around. Your voice will echo forever." The following Sunday night, we had a simple dinner to celebrate everything. It was just the four of us, as it always had been. At the end, Daniel stood up and said he had something to read. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and began. It was a letter. A letter written by him but signed by all three. The most beautiful letter I had ever received in my life. He read calmly, pausing between sentences to breathe. He spoke of me but also of them. Of the nights of uncertainty, of the mornings filled with coffee and courage. He spoke of fear that turned into a hug, of absence that turned into presence. You saved us from oblivion. One of the sentences read. You transformed pain into shelter. And you taught us that love is built, even on desolate land. I cried. I cried like never before. Not from sadness nor from pain, but from a recognition that cleanses the soul. Every word of that letter healed a part of me that I never knew still hurt. It was the final period of a long story, written by many hands, with much silence between the lines. And now nothing more was missing. Because in the end, it all started with something I didn't even know was so strong, my name. And it all started with a name that became love. Mornings took on a different rhythm once the boys became men. I still call them that, my boys, even though they now have firm voices and large hands. We tend together to the garden I planted in the difficult years. Now flourishing and full of colors that didn't exist in the past. They help me prune, sow, and harvest. And as I work the earth, I think that it was there I buried not only seeds but old pains. Each flower carries a tear that turned into a root. One calm afternoon, I received a letter discreetly left at the gate. I recognized the handwriting even before opening it. Rachel. There was no return address, just loose words, a muffled lament. She spoke of the boys, of me, of what she lost. She didn't justify anything, nor did she ask for forgiveness. It was as if she wanted to touch a time that no longer existed. It wasn't an excuse. It was longing. I read it to the end in silence. Then I folded the paper gently and walked to the back of the yard. I lit the small brazier and let the wind do the rest. The flame rose slowly, turning each word into light ashes. No resentment. No bitterness. Just the certainty that some stories need to stay where they ended in the past. Some seeds we do not plant again. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.